Yama Yuba is a hideous old hag with long straggly, yellowed hair, piercing eyes, tattered clothing and a gaping mouth that stretches across her entire face. The mountain witch was once a normal old woman, living in a small village in Japan. But the area experienced a terrible famine and food became scarce. Her children didn't want to feed her anymore, so they drove her out of the village and left her in the woods to die of starvation. But Yama Yuba didn't die. She made her way up into the mountains and found shelter in a cave. Living alone for so many years gradually drove her insane and she became a cannibal, existing on the flesh of people she killed. She built a little hut, deep in the forest, and now, to survive, she preys on travelers who become lost in the mountains. She poses as a pretty young woman and offers them shelter for the night in her hut. But once they fall asleep, she kills them and eats them. Sometimes she uses her hideous hair to entangle her victims and drag them into her giant mouth. In some stories, the mountain witch offers to lead a lost traveler back onto the right path. Instead, she leads him off the edge of a cliff and he falls to his death on the rocks below. The Yama Yuba then rushes down to the bottom of the cliff and hungrily feasts on the poor traveler's remains. A husband and wife were at home one evening when they heard a knock on the door. When they went to answer it, there was a strange gentleman standing on the doorstep. He was dressed in an expensive black suit and he was holding a large briefcase. "I wonder if I might have a few moments of your time," he said. Assuming he was a traveling salesman, they invited him in. The gentleman placed his briefcase down on the kitchen table and took something out. It was a box with a single red button on the top. He handed the box to the husband and wife. "Today is your luck day," he said in a calm tone. "You have an opportunity to become rich beyond your wildest imagination. If you press this button, you will receive $1 million in cash. There is just one catch. Someone you don't know will die." Saying that, the gentleman opened his briefcase and showed them the stacks of money inside. The gentleman told them he would return the next day to collect the box. After he left, the husband and wife discussed the box. They argued for hours. Eventually, they decided to press the button. Nothing happened. The next day, the gentleman came back. He took the box and in exchange, he gave them $1 million. As he was about to leave, the husband asked, "Did someone really die?" "Of course," the gentleman replied. "It happened last night. In a distant place. Someone you don't know died." The husband felt guilty. His conscience was eating at him. "One more question," he said. "Yes, what do you want to know?" said the gentleman. "What are you going to do with the box now?" The gentleman smiled and said, "I'm going to give it to someone who doesn't know you." There was a small village in the middle of a dark forest. In the village, there was a haunted house that everyone was terrified to enter. Nobody would dare to stay there overnight. Legend had it that every night at midnight, a bloody severed head fell down the chimney. One day, a rich man was passing through the village. After hearing about the haunted house, he offered $1,000 to whoever was brave enough to spend an entire night inside. None of the villagers would take him up on his bet until a young boy stepped forward and raised his hand. The boy announced that he would spend the night in the haunted house as long as he could bring his dog with him. The man agreed and it was settled. The next evening, the boy set off for the haunted house with his trusty dog following close behind. As he entered the dreary abode, he whistled a happy tune to calm his nerves. After doing a little exploring, he decided to make himself comfortable in the living room. He started a fire in the fireplace, then lay down on the couch with his dog and waited for morning to arrive. For a while, nothing happened. Then, a little after midnight, he thought he heard a strange noise over the cracking of the fire and the creaking of the house. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere out in the woods. Someone or something was singing a haunting tunes. "Me Tido Tai Walker," sang the eerie voice. The boy stared out the window and his hair stood on end. Maybe it's just somebody taking a shortcut through the woods, he told himself. Then, his dog suddenly perked up and sang, "Lynchy Kinchy Collie Molly Dingo Dingo." The boy could hardly believe his ears. His dog had never uttered a word before. Now it was answering the haunting voice in the woods. He pinched himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. A few minutes later, the boy heard the voice singing again, only this time it was closer and louder. "Me Tai Do Tai Walker," sang the mysterious voice. The dog answered again, "Lynchy Kinchy Collie Molly Dingo Dingo." This really had the boy scared. He was afraid that whoever was lurking in the woods would hear the dog singing and come to get them. A few minutes later, the boy heard the voice singing again. Now it was in the backyard. "Me Tai Do Ty Walker," it cried. The dog sang back louder, "Lynchee Kinchy, Collie Molly, Dingo Dingo." A few inutes later, the boy heard the voice singing again. Now it was coming down the chimney. "Me Tai Do Ty Walker," it yelled. Again, the dog sang back, "Lynchee Kinchy, Collie Molly, Dingo Dingo." Suddenly a bloody severed head fell down the chimney. It missed the fire and landed right in front of the dog. The dog took one look at it and fell over dead from fright. Then, the head turned and stared at the boy. It slowly opened its mouth and screamed. The next morning, the rich man went to check on the boy. He found him lying on the floor of the haunted house. His hair had turned white and he couldn't stop screaming. The Appointment is a spooky story about a teenage boy who has a frightening encounter with death. There was a 16-year-old boy who got a summer job working on his grandfather's farm. One morning, his grandfather sent him into town on an errand to buy some provisions. The boy drove the pickup truck into town and parked outside the market. As he was walking along the street, he was jostled by somebody in the crowd. When he turned around, he was shocked to see it was the Grim Reaper. Death. As he stood there in the marketplace, Death beckoned to him. The terrified boy jumped back, ran back to the pickup truck, and drove back to the farm as fast as he could. When he got there, white-faced and trembling, he told his grandfather what had happened. "Let me take the truck," he begged. "I'll go to the city and hide. Death will never be able to find me there. It's the only way to avoid my fate." His grandfather told him he could have the truck, and the boy floored the accelerator and tore off at high speed. After he left, the grandfather went into town looking for Death. Eventually, he found the Grim Reaper standing in the crowded marketplace. The grandfather walked right up to Death and asked, "Why did you frighten my grandson when you saw him this morning? He's just a boy. Only 16 years of age. He's too young to die." "I'm sorry about that," said Death. "I did not mean to beckon to him. I was just startled. You see, I was very surprised to see him here in the marketplace. I have an appointment with him this afternoon, in the city." According to legend, every Halloween, a strange and grotesque old lady roams the streets, preying on children who are trick-or-treating alone. Some call her the Leg Woman and others refer to her as the Legmonger. One boy was on his own when he heard a rustling in the bushes next to him. An old woman with stringy, black hair and a hideous, wrinkled face emerged from the undergrowth. The boy was startled to see she was holding a severed leg in her hands and waving it in his face. "Do you want a leg?" she cried. "Do you want a leek?" The boy assumed it was just a Halloween prop, but the woman was so disturbing that he began backing away from her. She persisted, asking him over and over if he wanted a leg. Finally, the boy said no. "I don't want a leg." A group of adults and children who were nearby heard a horrible scream ringing out in the darkened street. They rushed around the corner and got the shock of their lives when they discovered a young boy lying on the ground in a pool of blood. His right leg had been completely ripped off at the hip. If you meet the Leg Woman on Halloween night, be careful. She will come up to you and ask, "Do you want a leg?" If you answer no, she will tear off your leg and disappear. If you answer yes, she will grab you and try to attach the severed leg she is carrying to your body. The correct answer is I want both my legs. The Wristbands is a creepy ghost story from Korea about a doctor who has a close encounter with a ghost while working the night shift at a hospital. In Korea, when a patient is taken to hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm and they are taken to the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he finished his last operation. He was on the 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep and many of the nurses had already gone home. He entered the elevator and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the basement and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor. "I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a red wristband on his arm." "A red wristband," said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?"